Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman, and today I have another returning guest, one of my favorite people in the world, Miss Marcella Allison. Marcella, welcome back to Practical Liberty.
I love being back here and I love what you're doing.
So, Marcella and I are we're partnering up on a project that we're going to get into, I'm sure, in the later parts of this podcast. But what I really wanted to talk about today is when it's time to partner with people and when it's time to go alone. Like, how do you make the decision? Because Marcella and I have done a couple projects together. A lot of people know about the health promo we did that did $144 million. Obviously, a great example of partnering up with people and making it work. But we've also done solo projects. I have a course I did solo. I have some products I'm doing with people, including the one coming up with Marcella. So, Marcella, welcome back, first of all. And I guess I want to get your take because you've partnered with a lot of people. You've also done some solo projects. How I know, right? You've partnered with everybody. This is
I
actually
know.
your the super skill that I talk about with you all the time is your ability to connect people and put people together. But you don't just do that for other people, right? You do that with yourself. It's not
Right,
You're not
right.
out there like trying to be the solo hero conquering the world,
Mm-mm,
right? So,
mm-mm, mm-mm.
what are your criteria? What do you think about when you approach a project, whether or not you want to partner with somebody? Is it actually just your first instinct to partner with people as opposed to go it alone? Or,
It is, which is, it's interesting because, you always got to talk about the shadow side of things, right? And I remember Carlene Anglade Cole, who we both know, a great mentor, fabulous copywriter. She once said to me, like, stop that. Stop partnering with all these guys. Like, just do a promo and you're like, what? You're giving away too much money. Why are you doing this? Right. And there's sort of good, I would say there's good and bad sides, right, to why I do it. So let's go to the neurotic side first. So the neurotic side is like, I want someone else to tell me it's good. I want someone else to give me the gold star, to say it's done, like to have that confidence that another person of, when I first started out, people who were 5 times better than I was at copywriting, right? Because I was partnering with David and Paris, for them to say now it's good enough, right? So sometimes it was psychological safety, I guess, like of someone saying, yeah, this is good enough, you can turn it in now. Or I don't even know if it's safety, just confidence. The other thing in a positive way is often their skills complement my skills, or the way we are in the copy complements each other, right? So I'm seeing a thing, but they'll see a different thing. So I'm really good at making complex things simple. I'm really good at conversational tone. I'm really good at explaining things. And then half the time I forget to sell, right? Because I'm like all excited about the story I'm telling, right? So, like David or you or what, we come back in and make sure, right? Okay, well, let's remind them of the benefit. Let's tell them they're going to be able to get this later. Let's tell them why you're telling them the story in the first place, that kind of thing. It also gives you someone to brainstorm ideas with, which I think is really helpful because, especially like David is just an idea generating machine, right? So we just finished this insane project we've been working on for a week. And the way we balance each other is he will constantly open things up. Oh, what about this idea? What about that idea? Do you think about this? Oh, we could try it this way. Like that's how his brain works, right? That is killer at the beginning of a project. You need that. Don't lock into that idea too soon. I remember Mike Ward saying, if you zoom in on the bullseye, right, in your first 5 minutes, it's not the right target. But
sometimes,
then when
yeah.
you get, right? And then when you get to the end of the project, he keeps trying to open it up. And that's my job to be the closer. And I'm like, no, 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 we already picked that. We're gonna stay with this. We've got 5 hours. We're gonna nope, nope, nope. We're gonna so we complement each other in that way. So I think partnering is about complementing. It's also like when I think of our partnership, it's about fun, right? Like and community and building something together. Yeah, you could probably do it this what our secret project on your own, and I could probably do it on my own, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as fun and it wouldn't bring as much energy to the mix as if
Yeah.
we're both engaged. What do you think? You
Well,
know?
I mean, it's interesting because this is not just you partnering up with other people that we're talking about, right? David
Right.
actually got the project that you just finished or are finishing up, and he
Yeah,
brought you
fingers
in.
crossed.
The same
Right.
thing that I did with the health product is, I had this product that I was selling to women starting menopause, basically as our main audience, and I'm like, look, I know how to sell, but I don't know the pains and struggles. And I'm going to say something stupid and insensitive because I'm a man, and that's what happens when men talk to women. Um, it's true. I'm sorry. I'm not being
Right.
sexist here. This is just, we
It
don't
just
understand
happens.
each
It
other.
just
Yeah.
happens, right? Yeah.
There's a mismatch in understanding of
Right.
experience. Um, but so like, I actually want to know, so all right, you were talking about the fun. Yes, I actually do enjoy working with on projects with people more. And I had the same thing as you, especially early on when like, I had my first mentor was Mark Ford, and oh man, I was terrified of sending it to him, but I would have never put out copy if I didn't have his review on it at first. Like we're going to a
Right.
list of 150,000 people with this writing that, that has to sell or I get fired basically. And so I was just too nervous to send it out without him. And then I, went right into a relationship with Jed Canty, who was just an amazing. He's also kind of like David in the fact that he's never done with ideas.
He is. He's really, oh my God, yes. Which is hard on both of us. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Jed it's been filming day and he's like, call the lawyers. I want to put this in. And you're like, dude, we got to
Right.
rewrite the script on the fly. And it works a lot of times. It's stressful, but I love that
Mhm.
creativity. And I'm kind of a mix between the get it done and the bring ideas to it, mostly because I get bored so easily with a project that like, I want it done. I just want it off
Yeah.
my plate, especially
Yeah.
financial stuff, man. Like I did this project for an Agora division very recently that did over $1 million, which was great, but it was a rush job. And so I would like an extra month. No, I've taken as much as 5 months to write a promo, which was too long.
Right.
And that's just torture because every single line is getting re-examined. Now that was the John Boehner promo that broke all the Agora records, so maybe it was worth it.
So it's right, right.
But
If the payoff is there, but it's still exhausting.
yeah, but at the same time, like I would really this project was too short, right? I had basically 3.5 weeks to get all the copy done. It was kind of 4 weeks, but I started a little late.
Yeah. Dude, this one with David was 2 weeks. I have 10 days, actually, 10 days. I've lost my mind.
But yes, I want to get things done. I don't know, with my own promo. Sometimes I take 2 days to write my own stuff, but that's because I know exactly what I want to say. All the research is in here. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I don't have to try and learn some other guru's voice, right? This is all about me. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of going on a tangent, but like I do like the fun aspect of it with it. I think it's not just the sum of like it's not 1 plus 1 when you work with another person, right? There really is a collaborative
Yeah.
effort that makes it more than the sum of its parts. So you can get a lot out of it, but sometimes you do give up too much and you do lose confidence. The first time I really went on my own was with when I left my mentorship with Jed essentially and went out on my
Mhm.
own and got the creative director role. And I was nervous the first couple times, and then I crushed it. Like I didn't need to be that nervous. So the wins give you confidence overall. Um,
Right.
but but then I come back and I'm doing partnerships with you. So I launched my first product on my own, and everything else I'm doing, I have the X Plan community, which I've teamed up with
Right.
Tame Nix, who is he brings so much. Like I mean, he's 53. He's been traveling the world since he was 19. Like he has so much more experience at investing and traveling and getting all those things
Right.
done.
Right.
I'm partnering with Nick Watts on the SaaS product that we're building because look, Nick has been a SaaS developer now for a decade. Like I can't
Yeah.
possibly do that. I have the marketing skills, but so I'm bringing in a complementary piece that I don't have in both of those things. Now with you want to just announce what we're doing?
Oh, why not? Let's go for it.
All right, so
Well,
we're
we don't even
launch.
have our ringmaster hat on.
I do not yet.
You've got it up
But you will
there. Oh
notice
my God,
I
I love
put what's funny is I actually ordered the sign and it didn't come in time for this. So I printed out a picture of the logo and put it up
it.
there. That's just covering something else.
I love it. I love it. It's going to be bigger. It'll be bigger.
We are launching a copywriting community called the H&M Show. All right, so I don't want to get into too many details just yet because we're still in the planning and launch phase, and there's a lot of really cool surprises that we're going to bring out with this. Uh,
Don't
but
tell them all the goodies yet.
But the basic idea is we're launching the H&M show, which stands for Henry and Marcella, which I had to be educated about when that H&M is actually a clothing brand or something like that.
Yes, yes, it's a
All right,
clothing store. It's a clothing store.
whatever. I'm not a fashionista unless you
And we're not selling clothing, just to
no.
be clear. We will
Th-
not be selling
This
clothing.
is for copywriters. It is going to be an experience for copywriting, education, and community like you've never experienced before.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's really going to shake up the copy world. But again, I could do some of this on my own. You could
Right,
do some of this on your own, but
right.
together the one of the things I talk about in copy, and it's actually a life skill, is being entertaining, being engaging, being over the top, exaggerating yourself. This is Chris Rock has this quote when somebody asked him, they were hanging out with him privately, and they said, "Oh man, you're a little bit different than you are on stage." He's like, "No, I'm still me on stage. I'm just me times three." And so
I love that. I love that.
I think that's what that a lot of people miss, is that there are times when you need to uh, be a spectacle. It brings attention to things that would otherwise get passed up, and attention is one of the most valuable commodities that you can have. If you any idea you want to sell, whether it's copy a product or the idea of freedom, or I have a lot of Bitcoiners here. If you want to sell the idea of Bitcoin, this is why people talk about like the to the moon stuff, right? Because you go
Right.
over the top to really get people to pay attention, because if you don't get their attention, you can never get your idea across. So
I
anyway,
agree.
that
I
is
agree.
the product we're teaming up on.
And I think what helps about having two people to do that, I mean, yes, you can be a stand-up comedian, you can grab attention in your own way, you can be entertaining in your own way, but it does help to have that energy to riff off of each other. And to me, my background is in contemporary art, which some people know, not everybody knows. And it's in a specific kind of contemporary art. It's in a contemporary art that is all built around creative collaboration. And to go all the way back to your first question, I think that is why it is my automatic instinct to create collaboratively on something. So if you have heard about Andy Warhol's factory and you think of how that was produced, right, and all the people that cooperated and partnered with Andy to do all those pieces, right? Well, that's kind of the work that I did in the art world for my first mentor, Carl Salway, at Carl Salway Gallery. And what I saw happen is like an artist would fly in, like Namjoon Paik, who's the founding father of video art, right? So he would come to the factory and he would have an idea like, oh, I want to make robots based on the French Revolution, and let's make Robespierre, and let's make Olympe de Gouges, and then the team would be like, oh, that's really cool. And then someone would say, oh my God, I've got this fabulous tulle skirt we could use. Like it began to be this chorus, right? And I was just listening to 4,000 Weeks again by Oliver Berkman, which we could talk about a little bit. And one of the things he talks about is the energy or the force that comes from doing an act together. So he talked about a chorus and the studies on what happens when you sing as a part of a chorus as opposed to alone. And he even goes to marching, like even I know you're a history buff and you'll probably get this better than I do, but he talked about how between the world wars all the technology changed and you no longer marched in formation. That was just like an exercise to get you killed, right? If you all lined up and marched like you've been taught to do. But they still did it in practice, even though they didn't do it on the field. And the reason was they realized that's what bonded people together was literally marching in step together for a long period of time. And it amplified their sense of community and of doing something together. And I think that magic happens when we're working on copy together. I mean, this week, David and I, it had to be 10:30 at night. I'm tired and crabby. He's tired. We're in the document. We're in a sentence. I'm like, this isn't working. We have to do this. And literally, we're finishing each other's sentences and typing over each other in like 10 seconds. We had it fixed. Like, that kind of, and it just gives you such a rush, right? He's like, oh my God, I love when we do this. I'm like, I know this is like so next, like you said, there's another amplification that happens. And I think the important thing, and I'm curious what you think about this, is it doesn't happen with everybody,
So
right?
this
Like,
is
you
yeah,
know?
like let me jump, because I do want to touch on that first, but there is something I think it's different in I think there's different types of collaboration. There
Yeah,
is like corporate collaboration where you're in a meeting room from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Then there's a donut break for 15 minutes, and then there's another 20 minutes, and it's very structured, and it's not. You can get some things out of those, but this is why most people in corporate America think meetings are a waste of time, and they're trying to
right,
eliminate them, because that type of structure doesn't work. There's entrepreneurial collaboration, which is a very different thing. It's you. are sitting in that room from 9 a.m. till 12, and you got absolutely nothing done, but you know everything about each other at that point, right? You've talked about the weather and the stupid stories, and that one time you
Right.
got stuck in Thailand, and you know your driver took you to the Royal Palace instead of the Royal Palace of Thai food where you were supposed to go. Like those are the types of like stories that come out, and you get to know each other. And then the real collaboration, the real genius and amazing points come when you're exhausted, you're mad at each other, or you're like delusionally laughing. There it
Right.
gets,
So hard. Yeah.
but you have to push through this point of like normalcy, and break into this other realm of where creativity happens. Creativity does not happen as well. Like we talk about Stephen Pressfield all the time, and
Right.
he has his like you show up and then the muse shows up for you. So it's just discipline, and you show up, the muse, whatever. I've found that it's not actually true. Like, yes, there is something. It's very good to be disciplined, and you will get a lot more work done that way. But the
Buddhism.
coolest
Right.
stuff comes from an altered brain state. I don't mean like with drugs. I mean like
No,
there's
I agree. I agree.
you have been there talking and merging, and you've gone through different emotions, and there's something that happens where your brains sync up on these weird waves, but you have to be in the same space long enough to get that weird, interesting, creative collaboration where you are finishing each other's sentences, and all of a sudden it flows and it clicks, and a lot of the
It's
best writing.
Stealing Fire. I loved that book. When
Yes,
you sent me Stealing Fire, I have read that book like three different times, and they call it hive mind,
yeah,
right? And I do think the best collaborations, whether it's just two people or we've been on teams with five, six, seven people working on a launch, right? And there are moments, not all the time, but there are moments when you fall into hive mind together. And, the person who's working on the list says something like, you know who we should send this to? If you guys are doing that, we could send it over here. And then maybe we just like where all of a sudden everybody is like moving in the same direction
and,
seamlessly.
and it's I don't know. It's kind of like the same I feel when I hit a flow state. I think you can hit a flow state as a
Yeah.
group, but it's interesting because the same there's this gets to the who you don't want to collaborate with, because
Yeah.
when you're in some of those groups, if there's one person in there that sucks, that's just toxic and is down on the ideas,
Yeah.
and is
Mm-mm.
there's something about them, they cannot get in that state. Nobody in the group can get in that state. it's,
No,
it's
they
actually
are. Yeah.
it's why it's easier the smaller the group. The bigger the group, the harder it gets to maintain that. So I guess, what are some criteria that have you've noticed with people that have made terrible or just not great and productive collaborations?
I think a couple things. One thing that I learned when Jen Adams and I collaborated on the Mentoress Collective, which was really a great relationship. I mean, the business didn't like take off, but what was so helpful is, and this is something that I think Ray Dalio talks about. I could be wrong. I know Richard Rossi talks about it. We talked about what would happen if things went wrong when things were going great. So one thing I think you have to do is everybody enters into a collaboration and they think, oh, this is going to be fantastic. Everything's going to work. We're going to make tons of money, right? Nobody thinks, what happens when we don't have enough money and we have to pitch in money, but you have more money than I have money? What happens when, like you can think of a million different scenarios. And if you haven't actually had that conversation ahead of time, having it when you're in the emotional state of panic and fear and anger and resentment, it's like you might as well try to have like, I don't know, like go to marriage counseling when you're ready. We're trying to murder each other in your sleep. It takes a long time to get to the point where you can have a conversation. I'm not saying that happened to me, right? That's just like something I've heard. So I think the first thing you have to do is you have to talk about what happens if this doesn't work and how do we deal with that, right? So Jen Adams and I had this great conversation where I'm like, look, if something happens to me, my husband would have no idea what to do with this business. He won't even know where the checking account is. Like, you'll have to tell him. And so she's like, oh my God, mine too. He would have no idea. And I'm like, well, how do we do this? She goes, can we just make it simple and say if anything happens to either one of us, the other person just inherits whatever's left and our husbands are out of it? I'm like, that's easy to me, right? That works. She's like, and if by some like act of God there's $1 million in the account, I'll give Tom like a chunk of it. And I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. Like, so thinking about what could go wrong and not going into it with the idea that everything will go perfect, right? Because it just won't. And I think also psychological safety. And David asked me an interesting question. We had a knockdown drag out argument as much as we ever do. Like, I screamed F you at him this week, in a
No,
moment.
you would never say that word.
Yeah, and then, we got through it. By the end, he had me laughing. I texted him afterwards. I'm like, yo, dude, thanks for like, letting me just like lose my shit at you. And I said, there's very few people in a mentoring relationship or a partnering relationship that I can do that with. And he's like, why do you think that is? And I was thinking about that. And I'm like, because I have a lot of psychological safety with David and with you, right? I can say something to you and I know it'll be okay. And I know that we'll work through it. And I know that I can tell the truth. There are some people where when you tell the truth, they're going to either argue with you, shut you down, discount you, tell you that's not true. So you got to have some kind of safety that you can say the thing you need to say. The person might not agree with you. I mean, you and I disagree on a whole lot of stuff, right? But I can say the thing I need to say, you can say the thing you need to say, and I can hear it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important, right? So psychological safety, and don't go in with rose-colored glasses and think that nothing's going to go wrong, and then say, what'll we do when something doesn't work? How will we handle this?
I think there's actually two types of partnerships that can work, right? So there is that what we have, which is basically an equal partnership. Like neither of us are expecting the other to have vast levels of experience and knowledge that we
Right.
don't have. And then there's the kind of mentor mentee relationship that really can work. Like when I started working with Mark and Jed, I was
Yeah.
really counting on them. Like I was a very collaborative, but it was understood that I was the junior partner and I was in my
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
20s, and it was understood that like when we got into a disagreement, the other person's opinion was the one that was going
Yes.
to carry the day. And that was clear from the beginning. And like I lost a lot of arguments, but I also won some. Like there was times
Right.
when both Mark and Jed would go, "Oh, that's a really good idea," or "That's a really good
Right.
point."
Didn't that just make you want to like stand up
Yeah.
and shout? Yeah.
So I think that you have to understand what type of relationship you're in when you get into it. If it's that
Oh my God,
mentor
that's
thing,
so
that's fine.
brilliant.
But if it's an equal partnership, then actually this will be something we should probably discuss is when we get in a disagreement, because disagreements are inevitable in business.
They're gonna happen. So
Um,
how are we gonna resolve it? How do we
yes,
work
and
through it?
I
Like,
really
yeah,
think it's kind of the different roles that we've already talked about this a little bit, the
a little
different
bit,
roles
yeah.
that we're playing in it. Because like the marketing is something that I do have a little more experience in. The community management is something that you're definitely, you're
Right.
100 times more, what I call you, warm and cuddly than me. No, yeah, I said you're 100 times cuddlier than me in that first email. Which is true. But it's also that contrast is what makes our relationship funny. It's what makes
Exactly.
the H&M show work, is that
Yep.
I can be cranky and you just want to
Right.
give everybody a hug and pat them on the
Right.
head
Yep.
and say, you'll be
There
all
you go.
right.
Yep.
So,
You know what you brought up is really important. That's what Ray Dalio says too. He says he teaches his why can't I think of that Principles, the name of
yeah.
his book, which I have not read all the way through because let's face it, it's this thick. So I've skimmed. But he has this whole section where he says, when you're in a conversation, you want to know, is this a teaching moment? If so, am I the pupil or the student based on your experience, which is the one that you're talking about, right? He's like, is this just brainstorming and all ideas are welcome, where like the janitor can say something and the CEO can say something because we're just talking about I don't know what temperature the building should be set thermostat or something where everyone gets to bring an idea. Then we're peers, but we're peers in this role of giving feedback. He's like, and then the final one, right, is when you're in this argument over like maybe a piece of copy or a skill or an approach, like you're in a moment where a decision has to be made. And that's when he says what you did. He said, so if you haven't skied a black diamond, then you don't get to say how that person should approach the like you don't get to be the decision maker until you've done the thing or at least been through the thing completely. And I think knowing what conversation you're having is a huge piece of it, right? So if you're with a partner and you're talking about something that is in your zone of genius, right? And I haven't done it or don't have the experience with it, then of course I'm going to defer to you, just like you're deferring to your partners on your other projects who have, like Tane, you're like, okay, this
Yeah.
is his thing. He knows this thing. So if he says, no, I think we should do it this way, it's like, okay, let's do it that way.
Yeah, exactly. I am not going to tell you if it's better to buy a house in Guadalajara, Mexico, or, uh,
Right.
or,
Right.
or Argentina somewhere. It's I can research it. I can have my opinions.
But
That man has been on the ground there for 20 years and like knows the
he's
people and
Black
speaks the
Diamond.
language, and he can tell you what restaurant to go to. I can
Right,
I have
right,
to Google like what language they speak. So like I
right,
mean it's
right.
I'm not quite that desperate or that uninformed, but it is that level of like he man has been on the ground, done it. But also then when it comes to selling the thing, I mean, Tane is actually a good copywriter. He's been marketing his own products and stuff for a while, but I have a lot more sales under my belt and a
Right,
lot more experience in a
right.
lot of more different situations. So when it comes to building the product and managing the community and what we include and how we go about that, that's my side. His side is really the deliverables and where we're investing and
Right.
all those things. So yes, it knowing your role is important.
I think money is hard too. Like you asked, we start out saying like, when does it not work? I have seen the nightmares I've seen have usually been um, around money, right? Or around not being clear about who's doing what. And it's not even just money in terms of money. Like Annie Hyman Pratt is just brilliant at this. In her book, The People Part, in terms of someone who is wanting to know how to build successful teams and partnerships that have healthy communication. The People Part by Annie Hyman Pratt is fabulous. My husband's using it in construction right now, but I've seen it fall apart because, again, rose-colored glasses. We're never going to need to add more money. People are at different levels in terms of how much they can invest. But one person gives money, so they're like, well, I gave all the money. And the other person is, yeah, but I flipping worked 40 hours a day for 6 months. Like what, like that's equal, right? So if you don't have those conversations and it's not just the money, but it's the value of, she puts it in three categories. She says, you look at every person and you say, you rank them like as a percentage. So if we say the H&M show has 100% of category A, so what do you bring and what do I bring, right? And you kind of break it down, and she does it by reputation or like name brand, that's one. Time, that's one, and money is one. And I think if you're looking at partnering with anybody, kind of taking the time to have a conversation to say, okay, between the two of us, who has the more name brand? Are we equal? What's the right? Who has more cash that they're investing and who's putting more hours or time in? And you kind of go that way so that you see the value of all the contributions. And then she actually has formulas where you turn those into equity by going through those conversations.
It's funny. I have been on projects where the person with the money, every time you need a cash infusion, they take more of the company or more of they're like, oh, and it is disheartening for the person. Cause I was young when I was doing those deals and I just didn't have the money to put in. So it was like, well, I don't have any choice because either you put in the money or this goes away entirely. And that sunk cost is
Yeah,
gone. And
I know.
do I want to make, some money out of this, like as opposed to all right, well, if we were 60-40 partners in the beginning and we're 80-20 partners by the end when all the capital's in, well, if that 100% is still big enough, if the 20% that I'm getting, it's like, well, I would get nothing for all that, but you feel taken advantage of. It's funny because I'm a super capitalist, like I'm a big investor. I believe in laissez-faire markets, but in my own deals when I partner with people, I am a communist. I'm like, we're gonna split it because, well, honestly, it's because it really is about reputation, and I feel like the happier the collaborative relationship is, the better the product's going to do overall. I want to make as much money as possible, but like I want everybody to make the money. Like I really think
Right.
we can
Yeah.
all do this together. So I give way more away than I need to technically if I was going to be a hard-nosed negotiator. But I feel like I'm building goodwill. It's You're going to have happier partners, working a longer-term relationship,
Yeah.
and
Nobody wants to be in a relationship where they feel like they got taken advantage of or they're being screwed over and now they just have to deliver it. And that happens when, just like you said, one person has all the money and one person has all the time. It can get really out of whack.
yeah,
And a lot of copywriters, that's what they get offered in the beginning. Well, you write the copy and I'll give you X. And so you need to have that conversation, right? And again, I think the people part's a great way to do it, but you need to sit down and go, so this happened with David and I. So in the beginning, I would review his copy in exchange for him looking at my copy. And my skills and his skills were disproportionate. So we, in our initial conversation, we talked this through and I said, okay, how about 2 to 1? 2 of my hours equals 1 of your hours, or 4 to 1. I can't even remember what it was in the beginning. And we said, okay. And then at a certain point, I said to him, I need to have this conversation again with you because now I've been writing for 10 years and I don't think this is the right split anymore. Right. And so between David and I, we've probably had that conversation, not just about time, but about money splits on projects that we did together. I bet 5 or 6 times. Like, so you have to like know that things will change and you got to go back into the conversation, right? Did the company need more money and the guy had to put in 10 million? Well, yeah, you should get a little more equity for that, right? Or did this thing that he thought you could do in an hour actually take 6 weeks because something went wrong? And now you're like, okay, so the value of that was a little higher than we thought. You got to have those conversations, which goes back to, is a partner someone that you could sit down and say, hey, Henry, I know we said we're going to divide it this way, but I've noticed this is going on. Can we have a conversation about that? Right.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things to do, and this is actually a reason why I think a lot of people do solo projects, is because they'll get burnt like this, is you actually have to be ready to get burnt in business. Like it is going to happen where somebody you liked and trusted and either invested money or time in, or, whatever it is, they're going to turn there's going to be something on the line, and they're going to show their true colors, and they're going to just stab you in the back or walk away from you or talk trash about you. It happens. It's inevitable in business. If you're around long enough, I've had it happen 3 or 4 times in my life.
One
And
of them happened to us together, but we
yeah,
won't talk about that.
that only cost me $500,000, whatever. But the thing is, like, no, and I was really caught up on that for like 6 months, maybe 4 months. It was really, really like it was bothering me, and it was on top of a lot of other things. So it was a compiled effect, compounded
Yeah.
effect. But you have to learn to let it go, forgive people. You don't have to like forget that they did that. You're never going to do business with them again. But like, don't let it eat you up, because you're going to destroy your own life, and you're going to miss out on other opportunities in the
Right.
future because you're like, well, it's people will screw you. That's true, but not every individual person will screw you. It's a minority of people who are the bad apples, essentially. And if you walk into the business life expecting, just life in general, expect to get stabbed in the back and screwed at some point. And protect yourself when you can, but do not be too paranoid to do business. You cannot let it crush your soul and
Amen.
and go into a
Amen.
cave and hide, because there's so much out there to life, that there's so much opportunity and there's so
Yeah.
much collaboration, and you will find the best people in the world by going out there and opening yourself up to some of that. And you'll get stronger for having been stabbed in the back. And you'll learn some of those signs earlier,
Right.
and be able to avoid it in the future. But there's no substitute for experience with this. So
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
that's why I'm not really afraid to, like, I've been criticized for, quote unquote, jumping into bed with partners too early. Um, Obviously, we've known each other. Man, I have a picture of us. It's 13 years old, I think, at this point. It's in San Diego in
In the
2011.
rickshaw? In the rickshaw?
Yeah,
With
yeah,
the guy?
with Deutsch, um, in front of the Hard Rock at that Carlton event. So we like
I remember that.
this was not a rushed decision with you and I, and we've
Right.
collaborated on a
Right.
lot of stuff. But with Nick Watts and Tane, I knew Tane 5 years ago. I met him 5 years ago. I've only really known him and gotten to know him for a year, and we're 50-50 partners on the X-Plan community. And I'm like making myself kind of vulnerable by doing that, because I am the
Right.
one investing the capital, and it's my reputation and it's my servers and stuff
Right.
that we're putting up.
Right.
But I trust him, and if I get burnt, I don't think I will. By the way, Tane, if you're watching this, I
Right.
trust you,
We're
brother.
not
No
saying
worries.
anything. We're just theoretical.
But no, and Nick Watts, I've never met in person. He lives in Australia. But I've
Oh,
talked to him
wow.
enough that, like, and he has skills, and I'm really risking relatively little capital on
Yeah.
these. It's a few grand each, for each venture that I could potentially lose. And if we start scaling, maybe more, but I'll have more trust at that point too. So
And it's also a numbers game. I mean, the thing that you do that's so smart is you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try. It's the venture capital model, right?
yeah,
The old rule of thumb was there's going to be 10. We're going to make 10 investments. Like 7 of them are going to go sideways. 2 are going to completely tank, and 1 will be the rocket ship. But you got to do 10 to get that number because you can't do 1 and hit the rocket ship, right? And so
yeah.
you're going to have to take a risk with different partners. You're going to learn different things. But what you're doing is smart because you're trying a bunch of things, you're trying it with different people, you're learning, and what you learn in one is totally going to apply to the other. I mean, half the stuff I've learned in the collective I bring to what we're doing now, and everything you've learned from these other partnerships you're bringing to this.
And it's kind of fun doing this relatively in public with the podcast. I'm talking to these
Mm-hmm.
guys, I'm bringing them
Yeah.
on, I'm sharing everything I'm doing and through the emails and podcasts. So whether or not these things profit, and I think actually all of them have a good shot at being pretty successful.
Well, you don't want to start something that you think is going to go
Right,
sideways, right?
obviously.
Like you're going to start something that you think is profitable, but you're being
But
transparent about the process.
but we're months in on all of them at this point, except for yours and mine. But and I again, yours is a different situation, but even there, we have some really interesting things lined up that are very promising. Um, but like we're months in and they're still looking good, like good to be on track. It's not that like every investment I've made as an angel investor, I've believed in the beginning of like, oh, this has a great shot, and then sometimes 6 months in, you're like, well, that was interesting.
Right.
That
But
so
that's another thing about partnerships. Like, and this is where I fall down, right? Like, I get so attached to the people. I have a really hard time, even if it's losing money, even if it's not working. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I loved what I did with the Mentoress Collective, but I should have stopped about 3 years in, right? Not 7. Although then I would have missed a lot of joy. So who knows? But I think what the mistake we make is I get really attached to the person in the partnership. So then it's really hard to walk away and end it. And this is what, Annie talks about and quit because you're really attached and now it's a relationship and it's personal and you're like, and that's why I love that Jen and I were able to say, she's like, okay, I don't think I want to be partners in this business anymore. I've got other places I want to spend my money, right? And I'm like, okay, right. And we had already talked about how we would dissolve it. So that was easy, right? And then she still comes to my house and binge watches Bridgerton and hangs out for a weekend and visits her sister, right? Like that's, you have to also be willing to trust that if you have a relationship like we have and it doesn't work out, and I say, okay, I think we need to end this, or you say, hey, look, this other one is now $1 billion business, Marcella, I can't keep doing whatever it is, right? That we can work it out and I can still come hang out with you and go get beers and, um, that the relationship will still hold, right? And
yeah.
again, that's kind of like a safety thing and it's a knowing each other thing and it's also being a good human, right? To be able to go through those things and still make it work, right? But I think that's the other thing. People get afraid, so they don't leave one that isn't working.
Yes, that's true. I think fear is a major motivator for people. First of all, people, they don't get into things because they're scared, then they don't get out of things because they're scared.
Yes,
It
yes.
like fear is such a driver. That how do you overcome your fears of getting into a partnership and getting out of it when it's time? Like what would you say is how would you, because you've done this a few times, like you said with the mentoress, you probably based on your own experience should have done it ended it a little earlier than you did, and you stayed in because of some fears. So what
Yeah.
would be a good assessment criteria that you would use maybe every 6 months? Like, all right, let's do an exercise if we can think of one. Um,
Yeah. So, oh, that's a really good one. So, the one that I wish I had known, right, from Annie Duke is um, the idea of at the beginning setting what you both believe is reasonable criteria for a go no go decision, which is, that comes from the military. Actually, that's in your book, in that book you gave me, Stealing Fire, right? The that mission decision line, a go no go point, right? And she's like, in the beginning, when you're first starting out, you might make one that's 6 months out or 3 months out, or right. And it's just sort of like, if we haven't met, you keep it simple, like these 3 things, like if we don't have this many subscribers, we're not generating this much income, or maybe how much time it's taking, right? Because you think we can do this in 10 hours a week and all of a sudden it's taking 40. You check in on those things. And in the beginning, you might give yourself some course correction, like, okay, so now we're going to go 3 more months and we're going to say we need to change this and this and this, and these are the new hurdles. But at a certain point, if that keeps happening, right, you have to set that abstract criteria because in the moment you'll be too emotional. So if you don't have that cold hard criteria of how will we know if this is working,
mhm.
then you get tempted to keep going, right? And the reason you keep going is FOMO in its ultimate purest form. If I if Henry, if I leave this thing that I'm trying to build with Henry because we don't think it's working, and then, well, let's just say if one leaves, right? If I'm like, oh, if I leave this thing that Henry and I are doing and it isn't working and it goes on to make $1 million next month, I'm going to be really bitter,
Right.
right? Like I'm going to be, so it's this imagined future that we have that we think we'll miss. And maybe this is just a blip and maybe I should just work through this, right? So she's like, you can't keep lying to yourself, right? So you set the criteria. In the beginning you're learning like, okay, that was a little ambitious, we need to tone that down, right? But at a certain point, right, if that keeps happening, if every time you set a goal you don't meet it, or you're like, you have to say, okay, this isn't working, right, and step away, right? But that's the hardest thing to do.
This
So
is
she calls it a kill criteria. She's like, start out with a kill criteria.
I really like that. So it's interesting in some of these agreements that I have going on, the ones that are under my main LLC, which is the Freedom
Mm-hmm.
Business Network, because I have my freelancing courses under Freedom Business Network's X Plan. Ours is going to be under Freedom Business Network because they're all about really increasing, an individual's ability to function independently in the world, even though
More
it's
money, more
collaborative.
time.
But in the agreements I have so the basic agreement I do is I don't believe in contracts until they're really necessary. So I sign basic agreements with people that here's our layout, here's what we expect each party to do, and
Mm-hmm.
here's the split of revenue, how we're going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
depending on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say when we hit $300,000 in revenue in a year in a 12-month period, then we are forced to renegotiate and formalize a contract. It's
I
okay. So
love it.
that's the success criteria because at three hundred
Right.
thousand dollars, that's a business that you don't want to go away no matter
Right.
how you split
Right.
that money. You don't
You
nobody.
hit proof of concept. You
Yes,
hit proof of concept.
but I have the success criteria for like, all right, we're really formalizing this thing now,
Right.
but I don't have the kill criteria yet, and I should probably start including that
Interesting. Yep.
because I could see spinning my wheels. The other thing that's really a motivating factor for people for not quitting soon enough is the embarrassment of having publicly announced this, having told people
Yes.
what you're doing, saying,
Oh God,
this
yes.
is I've now attached this to my identity and I cannot fail, and then have to walk away from that. It can feel humiliating. It's not. I promise you, people do not care as much as you think
Mm-mm,
they care about you.
mm-mm.
This is actually one of the best lessons in life is there
Yep.
are people that are paying attention to you. They don't care nearly as much as you think they do. They
Right.
might like you, they might be huge fans of you. The bigger the fan they are, the more they're going to forgive you if something goes wrong. But yeah, it's that embarrassment is such a huge factor in people just sinking. It's actually for gamblers, it's one of the big things. It's why they keep making bigger and bigger bets, is because they don't want to
Right.
have to
Because they
admit
don't
that
want
they
to have to.
lost all the
Yeah.
money gambling. And the
Yep.
only way
Yep.
they know to get out of it is to
Same.
keep gambling. So it's a
Yep.
psychological trap that you have to be prepared. And if you know it's coming, if you know that you might
Mm-hmm.
have to give up on this, from the beginning, it's easier to start things. Um, but if you've attached your identity to a project, this is
So
actually a
hard.
huge mistake that people make. And I worry about some of my Bitcoiner friends who have attached their entire identity to Bitcoin. Not that I don't believe in Bitcoin. I super do, especially with how much it's pumping this week.
Yeah, I know.
Finally
Bernie's
breaking,
very happy. She's been texting me also.
yeah, finally breaking 50K, 52 something today, I think. Now, who knows? This will be out in
Yeah,
2 days.
but
We'll
the
see it.
shame,
But
the thing about shame, I mean, you're so right when you say it's embarrassment, right? To be embarrassed to say the partnership failed, to be embarrassed to say the business didn't work, because embarrassment goes to shame. And when I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. Of course, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. But one thing I love that she says is that shame, unlike guilt, nobody wants to feel it. Like it's like a hand on a hot stove. You will do anything not to feel shame. So if your identity is tied up in your copy, right? Going back to what we talked about at the beginning, and you have to turn it in, right? Or your identity is tied up in your business and it's going to either publicly fail or not work or whatever, right? You will do anything to avoid experiencing the feeling of shame. So you have to be able to separate yourself psychologically from what you do. And I think the best entrepreneurs do that, right? They're like, um, I mean, I remember when I was closing the Mentoress Collective, I got sick comfort in Googling like all these really smart business people who had lost bazillions of dollars in their first, second, or third thing, or maybe they had three successful things and then they thought they could do this other thing. And then that, like, I was like, damn, that dude lost 1 billion. I'm looking good. I didn't even lose 1% of that, right? Like, you know what I mean? So getting out of shame with whatever you're working on, right, is so,
It's
if you're public in your work, I'm sure it happens privately, but you and I are in an industry that is as public as any industry I know, other than maybe what, stock trading, or I don't know, I guess someone getting up on stage, right? Stand up comedian like Kevin, right? Like, what we do is pretty damn public.
Yeah, what's interesting, so I know, you've done a little, or you came to one session with Brent, right? The
I
Lionheart thing that
was
Ian did.
just telling my
Uh,
mother about that this
but
weekend. We
but
won't go down that rabbit hole. But yes, yes, I did come, and he's
but
good. He's good.
yeah, I worked with Brent for 4 years at his full rate. And one of the really interesting things he talks about with I laughed at this because you had the argument with him in the class about the
Oh,
eight
yes, I
emotions.
did.
But he distinguishes very, very clearly between guilt and shame. And
Oh, so important.
guilt is internal. It is you feel bad for something you did.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hurt somebody, or I did something that was careless and somebody else got hurt, or
Mm-hmm.
something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Shame is what he calls a carried emotion. It comes from external and you absorb it yourself, but it is not internal. If you feel shame, and it's a very different feeling than guilt. If you
Oh,
really
it's
think
like
about, when you feel guilty, it's like deep in the stomach. When you feel shame, it's like in your head, right? It's
like you flush, and you also kind of feel nauseous, almost like you're like, oh God, make it stop. Like you just, oh.
But so shame is really a lack of a boundary, of because you're letting other people's thoughts come into you, which
Mm-hmm.
so you need to put up the boundary. Shame, when you feel shame, look for what's the actual cause, because it's not whatever you think it is immediately. The
Ooh.
proximate cause is not what's actually causing the shame. Now I know this is like woo woo a little bit, because
No, no, this is good. Keep going because I'm really interested in this.
but I mean, when you can correct, as Brent calls it, correcting the actual shame, which a lot of times it comes from a parent or an early teacher, or I
Mm-hmm.
had there
Mm-hmm.
was like there's actually something, I'm still like, I don't sing in public, because when I was in church as a kid, there was the choir teacher, who I won't name her, really, she literally, she kept hearing something. She made every individual go through and sing a note, and she was like, "It's you. You're doing that. You're just off. It's okay. Some people just can't sing." And I was
Oh
like,
my
"Oh, I haven't
God.
wanted to sing since, like, that's
Oh
and I was too
my
young for that."
God.
But that's shame. That's not me. Like, I was doing fine. First of all, I think
Mm-hmm.
she was wrong. I think it was actually her kid and she didn't want to admit it. But
Yeah, right. That's a
um,
lot of things. Most of it's their baggage. When someone comes at you like that, I'm sure Brent would agree. It's usually their baggage, not your
right.
baggage.
But so I mean, all that stuff. If you find, like, so I know that, like, I have a good voice in other ways. I could probably learn to sing
Well,
fine.
clearly from the podcast, you've got a great listening voice.
But it's that carried shame that, like,
Yeah,
anyway, it's finding out. So what is it about failure? Because we're all shamed at some point for some failure in our life, whether it's your parents or
all
your
of us.
teachers or
All
something,
of
or
us.
coach, whatever. You,
Right.
going back and identifying that and going, well, that was a very temporary thing. And any failure you have in business, it's a temporary thing. Unless you're dead,
Yeah.
you can keep going. You can keep winning. Like, your next thing can win. Your next thing can be that big
Yep.
breakthrough.
Yep. It's
Um,
also really freeing if you can get out of that. Like, you don't want to share everything about yourself. Like, I'm not saying that you like go up and tell strangers your deepest darkest secrets, but if you own the thing publicly, right? Like, you heard my talk at Kevin Rogers' event, right, where I talked about the failure, right, of the Mentoress Collective, and I shared some of Annie's lessons. So here I am, publicly naming the number, publicly saying it didn't work in front of a room of people like Jeff Walker, that I admire and I want Jeff to think I'm brilliant and smart and talented, not who's the crazy chick who, failed at the Mentoress Collective. But when you are the one who can separate yourself from the shame and just own that and tell that, it's hugely freeing, and it helps you not only make like, here I am about to do it again with you, right? I didn't say, oh my God, I'm never trying that entrepreneurial thing again. But I also did the thing I learned. I'm like, Henry, I'm good at this. I'm not good at this. I don't want to do that, but I can bring this. And will you do that? Right. Like I was really clear about my boundaries, right? Like you said. But when you can own the failure and own it in a safe way in a public place, like I did, right? That was a room of 150 people. Nobody came up to me afterwards and said, oh my God, I can't believe you were such a dipshit that you couldn't make money at the Mentoress Collective, right? Instead, it was, oh my God, you taught me so much. This was so helpful. I really appreciated the talk, because now they see you as a human. It's the same thing you're doing by being public about the things that you're trying, right? I trust you more because I don't believe you're trying to put on airs and act like you're perfect and your shit doesn't smell, and you feel more authentic to me, and you don't feel like an AI robot, and I know who you are. And like, so sometimes on the other side of getting out of that shame and just naming the thing is the shame actually goes away, because people don't come up and shame you. Nobody shamed me after that talk, right? They
Right.
came up and had amazing conversations, right? And said, oh my God, me too. Or I tried this. Or yeah, there's something I haven't been able to quit. And you just helped me see I really got to quit that. I was really, and then you transform it into something useful. What is that great line? Maybe someday this pain will be useful to you, right? Then the shame actually doesn't get stuck. It becomes something useful.
I there's So I think I'm building this business in public. One of the things I realized very, very recently was that I'm being an idiot with my email list, and I'm doing both copy content and like Liberty content, and those are not the same list at all. I've had people that I know and like when I'll say something like progressivism is a disease, and they'll just instantly
And someone like
unsubscribe.
me,
But if you go back to the Woodrow Wilson eugenics version of progressivism, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about progressivism, it is literally we can top down force society to be what we want, and no matter who gets hurt in the process, our utopia is worth it. Like that's Stalinism. Like so, when I say progressivism, I have a very different vision than what people think of when they think of AOC and like that
right,
group.
right, right, right.
Although I can trace the intellectual roots all the way back to it doesn't matter, but
Okay,
I'm
that was hilarious. That whole thing was hilarious. All right, keep going.
but I'm talking to two different groups, and I don't want to like I don't care if people all agree with me on my my basically cultural views, because they want to call it
Right.
political. I don't view it as political, but everybody else does, because it's anti their politics, so it's political to them. But
We'll
that
just
doesn't
call it hot topics. Hot topics.
but it doesn't mean that I don't have a lot to teach about copy, that they could
Right.
still be. So I just need to segment my list. And it took me, what, I'm 2-3 years into this now. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that was a good idea. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm an idiot in certain ways. I'm learning as I go. But like
All
admitting those mistakes, admitting like that, yeah, I don't know exactly. I know how to write
mhm.
copy, I know how to sell. I am learning how to run a business. Like this is,
They're different skills. They
and
are
I
different skills.
I have skills that can make the business successful. I know how to sell. I know how to create products because I've been coaching my clients through the product
Right,
creation.
right,
Um,
right.
like I've done a lot of these things, but I'm learning as I go. And people aren't mad at me when I say I did something stupid. They're like, "Ha,
No, they
right."
aren't.
It's and they trust you. They trust me more often. I don't know if it's universal,
Yes,
but if I say I did something stupid, they're like, "Okay, I can relate to that." He's
yes,
admitting flaws, and also he's still really good at what he does at
right.
this thing that I don't know. It's something that the more open you are, and you don't
Hmm.
want to be too open, right? I'm not
Right,
like,
which you just said, right? You're not like, yeah, right? But you are being transparent instead of trying to act like you have everything figured out and you don't make any mistakes.
yes. Um, and it's been interesting, and I'm learning a lot, and it's fun. Do you want to talk about creative anxiety? Because this is a topic that you brought up that it resonated with me. That just the concept, like it's
Well, so there's yeah, I was going to say there's an interesting transition between these two that I was just thinking about, which is from what you just said, which I loved. Um, Elise Bennon talks about how one way to be less anxious about this, about making mistakes, about in both your business, right, that you're building, copy, whatever your thing is, right, about making mistakes. One way to be less anxious is to think of yourself as a mad scientist. And so you're just experimenting. And then the thing is, as you're experimenting in this laboratory, you're also learning things that affect your personal life. Like the two feed each other, right? That there are, you're learning in your business, but you're still learning as a human being, right? Like, and so if you can, instead of seeing this as a test with a judge at the end who's going to stamp pass or fail on your forehead, if you can say, okay, I'm a mad scientist, Henry wants to do this thing. I said this thing at the beginning of the year to myself. I said, okay, right? Like, the Mentoress Collective in the form and the vision that I had for it did not work. There's a lot of things I learned, right? There's a lot of changes going on in the copywriting world right now. I mean, we were texting yesterday. Many of our financial clients are no longer clients, no longer exist. In fact,
Right.
money in my husband, right? And the whole industry is roiling right now, right? So this is the whole time of change. So I said to myself in January, your job is to be the mad scientist, to be open, to experiment. And here's where fear comes in. We want to say, I'll only do this thing if I know it's worth my time and it has a payout at the end. But you can't know that at the beginning.
Right.
So you can't say, I'll only start Practical Liberty if I know it's going to turn out that this was a great way to invest my money and my time right now so that I can have this freedom that I want, versus any of these other things you could choose to do, of which there are a million, because you're a very bright person, right?
Well, and I mean, I really like people. I don't want to like sound like I'm too arrogant here, but like it was a big risk for me to give up all of my
It's a
clients
huge
and
risk.
jump in to do this. Like I had obviously some savings and like, but I did it because I really think this is the right time to do it. I think
Mm-hmm.
the message of liberty is actually needed more now than it's been.
Than ever before. Yeah.
That yeah, like I don't know, maybe before 2008, but like I just don't see the same comeback happening that happened in 2008 happening now. So like
Mm.
I feel like it's the right moment. It was the right thing to do. But man, was I terrified when I was like, I sent that email off to Bob and some other people like, hey, I'm stepping back. Please, literally shut off my $20,000 a month retainer. Please stop paying
Yeah.
me this. That
Don't send me money.
yeah, like it's a weird thing to ask somebody to do when you don't have to. They're perfectly happy and they're saying, no, I'd really like to keep sending you money. And you have to say, nope, nope,
Right.
I'm
Nope,
trying
no,
this.
no, no. I'm gone.
And
I'm gone.
I've had multiple people try to loop me back into this retainer thing, and like
Mm-hmm.
it's not that Practical Liberty is rolling in dough right now. It's not making that much money, like especially relative to what I was used to. But like I know I see the path, and I just believe that I can have a lot more impact in the world here. But yeah, you got to get over the fear, and I'm still like operating on some level of faith that this is going to be worth it. So
Right, because you don't. And what happens is, I was just reading. I have fallen in love with a book again. Elise Bennon recommends. She has the best book recommendations. So she recommended Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks, and it's this brilliant book about sort of anti-time management. Right? He's like how to approach your life. But the section I was listening to that really struck me is how that is where that fear comes from, right? This idea of, we have limited time on earth, right? Everything around us is saying be more efficient, go faster, like time's running out. And like you're like, well, I don't have time to try a thing that doesn't work. Henry, you got to guarantee the H&M show is going to work and that this is the best way I can make retirement money, because for the love of God, I'm 59 years old, dude. I could have given birth to you. I don't have time for this not to work. We better do this, right? And you cannot even know. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, like we joke about that, right? But the truth is, you don't and can't know. So I said to myself, your job this year, in the midst of all the uncertainty, you point out the uncertainty in the world brilliantly, right, in Practical Liberty, but then the uncertainty in our smaller world of copywriting, right? We got AI, we got all this stuff going on, right? Uncertainty in the world of entrepreneurship in general, right? Like, my job is to every day get up and say, you are the mad scientist. Your job is to be open, be curious, and experiment. And I'm not saying you should start 70 businesses. That would be a lot, right? But I'm saying, when someone brings you an opportunity, it's Shonda Rhimes' book where she forced herself to say yes to everything for a year because she had spent her whole life saying no out of fear. And what happened when she had to say yes to everything. So I'm a little bit like that. I'm like, not to everything, but I'm like, you need to experiment. So, David, you come to me with this idea, right? You're like, hey, let's do this thing. And we start having a lot of fun and we're texting. And I'm like, oh, this could be really cool. And I feel the part of my brain going, this is going to be a lot of investment. This could be a lot of your time. What if it doesn't work? And maybe you should just take a guaranteed pay. Like, I can just, and I'm like, nope, it's an experiment. It'll either work or not work. I trust Henry. We'll either decide to keep going or not keep going, right? Like, and then David calls me, right? And he's like, hey, do you want to write a promotion in a week for this millionaire guru dude? And, if it works, we could get all these royalties. And I'm like, part of me is like, I don't know. And then I'm like, what's the worst that happens, right? It doesn't work. It's only a week out of my life. I can do this now. Felt like 7 weeks out of my life, but passed in 7 days. So again, like if you can be the mad scientist and do your due diligence, like Henry and I just went through, right? You don't just, anyone who calls you and says, hey, you want to do a thing together, you don't say yes, right? Like you do your due diligence. But then instead of saying, I'm only letting your brain say, only do this if you know it's going to work, only do, just say, might work, might not work. It's not me. It's an experiment. Let's just try adding a little of the green shit to the bleaker and maybe it'll blow up and maybe it'll turn purple. I don't know. Let's see. Like that's how you find those things. That's how you enjoy life. And what he says is try to realize that those voices that say only do it if it works comes from this sense of, oh my God, I only have so much time. I can only do things that work. I don't have time to fail. He's like, you have to, like you said, you have to be alive. You're going to fail. So
Well,
stop thinking that if you do it fast enough or like have perfect foresight that you'll never fail. It's the human condition.
and this is I said this in a podcast, I think last week at this point, that the reward is usually proportionate to the risk that you put in. Like the pleasure that you get out
Mm,
of winning is usually proportionate to the pain you would have gotten if you lost. And sometimes
yeah.
you're going to get the pain and it hurts. It does. It's not fun, but you'll never like, it's that, do you want to be, there was a point before I had, my whole sessions with Brent, I had my emotional range was a 4 to a 6, right? I was 6 was me being ecstatic, 4 was me being like crushed. And like you're laughing, but it's actually true. And it was a very narrow range, and there's a lot of reasons for it. But I'm still not at like a 1 to 10. I have I can't quite
No,
get
but
that.
you've changed dramatically since I
Yeah,
met
but
you.
I'm much more of like a 3 to 7 or 8, right? I can feel a lot more. Or the thing is, you always feel it. I'm willing to admit to myself, and I'm feeling like much
And
more
not
willing to admit
shut it
I'm
in the
happy,
box.
or like no, this is really uncomfortable and I don't want to be in this situation. Like I'm very
Yeah.
upset about this and I'm allowed to say it now. But it's I don't know, that I forget where I even started with this, but like this
I jumped in into.
um
But that's the risk you
but
take,
yes,
right?
it's the
Being a
risk to reward.
human.
Yes, feel the pain to get the reward.
Yeah.
And it's the pain is always temporary, like unless it's like the death of a child or something horribly
Mhm.
tragic, like the pain of failure, I should say, is it's a sting on your ego. But the more you do it, the stronger I don't want to say the stronger your ego gets, but that really is what it is. It's your ego.
Resilience.
You become much more resilient to the failure,
Yeah.
and you realize like it's a stumble. It's a step on the path. It's fine. I'm going to be fine. All right. We have been going for an hour now. So I do, and I know you have to get on some calls with some of the to finish up that project you were talking about. But
That
I,
shall not be named.
I do. It'll be public soon enough. I do want to encourage people. So Marcella and I have officially launched our website and email list. There's not a lot of content yet, but you can go to hnmshow.com to follow us. That's handmshow.com, spelling it if you want. I realized that after I registered the domain, but uh, it's we have a lot of really
Well, and
exciting.
also we can't be the exact H&M or people will be buying cute little tops instead of signing up for our email list. So it's
Exactly.
tandem.
But I think the stuff that we're really going to be sharing there is it's so important in the age of AI because it's the most human part of copy is really the
Yes.
spectacle, the entertainment, this is actually something I've been talking with a lot with some people I've been mentoring is I kind of call it experience by proxy. is they watch me rewriting copy, some of my copy, some of their copy, and they get
Mhm.
the experience of having lived through it. So I think one of the things that we're going to be doing a lot of in the H&M show is giving people that experience by proxy. We're going to show you our first crappy drafts and what it turned into, so you can see the revision process. And it's the only way to learn. I learned this from Jed and Mark when they were like tearing up my
We were
copy and redoing
watching
it
them
with
go
me.
through it. Yep.
I
Yep.
really think it's the only way to get to the top level is to that you get the experience, again, experience by proxy. So sign up to go to hnmshow.com. There's an email opt-in on like every page. We have our mostly honest bios up there, and a couple other things. So
I think the other thing, that you just said about that, that's so important about going through copy, that goes back to being vulnerable. That goes back to saying you can see that I wasn't perfect. And it goes back to
yeah,
saying you can see my failures, right? So, like, people are shocked when you take like our biggest promotion, like for Sherpa, and you say, okay, here was what our opening paragraph was on day one, and here's what it was, right, on day 49, right? And you see that we decided things didn't work. We cut things with, like, we were, in a sense, failing every day to get the right idea, but we didn't feel like we had to show up and be perfect. We could just, keep working through it. And I think that that actual level of seeing what the process of the copy is. But then what I love is we talk a lot about, okay, what was the emotional process here, right? You're
mhm,
like, Marcella, this is it. I think I've got it. I'm like, right? Or I'm sending you my headline for, the cannabis power trader promotion. And I'm like, isn't this brilliant? Don't you like how I set this up? And you're like, right? Like, you have to talk about the emotions that you go through. You brought up on here, like, you get tired at the end. You just want the bloody thing to be over. I am so crabby today. Like, I'm yelling at the client, like, that's what's supposed to be done on Monday. I have other stuff I have to do. And I'm like, wait, oh, I'm sorry. What I meant to say was, right, like, so what I love about this show is we get to do both. Like, we get to
yeah,
show you how the sausage is made externally with the words. But then, as you saw in our conversation here today, it is equally important to manage your internal process. Where's your perfectionist at, right? Where's your fear coming up? Where did you ditch the mad scientist and you went into a dark hole, right? And you, like, because they go in parallel. And the entertainment
mhm,
part isn't just in the copy, right? Part of the way that you stay in experimenting is you have fun, right? You bust each other's chops. David sends me the most horrible dad jokes, right? And, like, asks how I'm doing when he knows I'm, like, going off the deep end. That's where the entertainment gets layered all the way through. It's
yeah.
in the copy, it's in your relationship with each other, it's in the collaboration, right? Because life's too short. Life's too short. So, let's just have some fun while we learn this stuff. I'm not going to slap your hands with a ruler like the nuns used to do?
Nope. And play is a essential part of creativity. You're not going to be as
Amen.
you are not going to write as good of copy. You're not going to be
Mm-mm,
creative in any
mm-mm.
unless you're having fun. And it doesn't have to, like, there are times to be serious and really nail down, but play is such an important human experience, and it's an essential ingredient to creativity. So, all
Yep.
right, everybody. The amazing, wonderful Marcella Allison has blessed us again with much of her wisdom. And if you want a lot more of that, especially on the copy side, we're not going to be talking anything cultural, political. This is just fun and
And
getting
no
better.
women's empowerment. I have to keep that on my side. We're just coming together for copy, for fun, to take you really through the details. We have a lot more to tell you coming up that we will be cooking up as soon as I finish the project that I'm working on this
And
week and
I
Henry finishes his things.
I can actually guarantee you that the emails you're going to be getting from us are going to be the most entertaining emails. Um, Like, if you guys think Daniel Throssell is entertaining his emails, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Oh, do not
That
go. Do,
no,
do not go there. We'll end up in a Daniel email.
total,
No, no,
total, to,
no, no.
total amateur Australian. Not
Oh
that
my God.
entertaining. Gotta say it.
No.
Sorry,
Daniel, I was not part of this. For the record, I didn't know he was going to do that.
I didn't know it either until I thought of it. Uh, ladies and gentlemen,
throat.
H&Mshow.com, Miss Marcella Allison, Mrs. Marcella Allison, the wonderful,
Oh,
great.
and Henry Bingaman, who is my favorite partner in crime, and we realized when I added this up for this show that our promotions, the ones that we have done together, have outperformed any I have done with any other mentors. And as you know, there are some big names in there, but our
Uh,
promotions are the highest producing I have ever had in my career.
and they're the most fun to write.
Yes, yes, and they will be the most fun to break down.
All right,
And we
everybody.
will have a great time doing it together. All right. I hope to see everybody on the email list, and we will be back to you with even more adventurous conversation, I'm sure.
And until next time, stay free.